So say I was a teacher and I had a pre and post test as you guys do in step 2, and I assigned 3 questions identical from the pre-test and the post-test, and I split the credit amount pretty evenly. So for question 1 they could have possibly gotten from 0 to 33, again 0 to 33, and then 0 to maybe 34. Or if you guys wanted to split it up differently, 30, 30, and then 40. It really doesn't matter. These were all randomly generated numbers and they don't really represent any actual scores, but this is just to show you guys how to do the Excel part. And so what you guys will be expected to do as part of step 2 is to take your pre-test and your post-test, and you want to compare, you want to see if you had the students improve at all throughout your lesson. And so what we're going to do here is we have all our raw data, and as you see for our pre-test everything is nice and set. We have students labeled from 1 to 20. Our averages have been calculated, our totals have been calculated, and everything's ready to go. We just have to set everything up for our post-test as well. And so what you guys can do is you could sit there and type out each one of your students' names, but as a purpose of anonymousness, it would be best to not really call out on those students' names. So just keep it simple, related to student 1, student 2, but you don't have to actually go out and type, say you have 40 students. I wouldn't want to type that 40 times. So what you can do is just type out student 1, and an Excel can recognize a pattern where if you just grab this black dot and drag it down, it'll automatically label them through however many students you have. In this one, let's say we have 20. And to calculate our total is pretty simple. It's just a formula that you use in Excel. You just say is equal to total or sum of parentheses, and you just want to highlight these 3. Pretty simple. And again, the same thing that we did with these students, we're just going to drag it down until we get to the end of it. Alright, and then for averages it's the same thing, so you just say is equal to average parentheses your different values. Alright, and again you could just drag this over and it'll copy them all. I'm just going to do copy paste paste paste, and so there are averages. And so now you want to, it really doesn't really tell you much. I mean, you could look at this, say, well, question 1 it looks like it has a higher average, question 2 it looks like a higher average, and question 3 looks like a higher average. So overall, and then of course total has a higher total average. And so you could say just from right there that yeah, they did do better after your lesson. But it wouldn't really be presentable in a PowerPoint, or if you guys to go up to present to your classroom about your findings, you wouldn't want to show them your raw table or anything. So since our averages and totals have already been calculated, we don't really want any of this raw data, so let's just highlight it all, and we're just going to hide it by right clicking and go to hide. So now this is really the important stuff that we need to look at. And so now I want to have a comparison of each of the questions, so you can see a visual representation of their increase in knowledge. So let's say, so we want to do insert, and we want to do a column chart, and you guys could pick a 3D or a 2D one, it doesn't matter, or cylinder if you guys feel creative. Let's just stick with our regular one. And so it brings up a blank chart. All we want to do is just select data, and you want this data to be from here to there. Okay. And so Excel has already recognized that you guys that you wanted to create one with the questions and the averages being the comparisons. However, this isn't really the order that we want to do. I wanted the questions to be down on bottom, independently labeled, and the average of this to be on its own on the side. So all we want to do is just switch to row and column. And so now we have our averages for question 1, question 2, and question 3 for our pretest. And it's also important to label this not as just average. It labeled it average because that's what it was called here, but let's call that our pretest. So we'd go to edit, and for the series name we would just say pretest. Alright, and so now that's properly labeled. Now if we were to look at this, we can say, okay, pretest averages from there to there. Now you guys can also see that this isn't really that well of increments. It just goes from 20 to 22, which isn't really something that you want to do, especially for an analysis. You want to have the entire range of possibilities. So for this one, each score was possible of getting 33. So I want to change my axes by, okay, so we're done with that. So I want to change these axes from format axis, and we just want to have a fixed minimum and maximum. A minimum would be, of course, 0. You could get a 0 on this, and a maximum of 33. That shows an appropriate amount of space, but actually, I'm still not satisfied with that. Let's, instead of going to 33, since that's not divisible by 5, let's just go to 35. Alright, so there you go. So that shows a pretty good comparison of our pre-test scores, but we also want to analyze it and compare it to our post-test scores to see if there was an overall improvement between each question. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go to select data, and we're going to add another series, and this series is going to be post-test. And our series values are going to be the scores for our 3 questions. Alright, and so as you guys have seen, for question 1, on the pre-test has been labeled as 21. For question 1 on the post-test has been labeled as 27. And of course for question 2 is 20, question 3 is 21, and as well for our post-test as well. And so what we're going to do now is we need to more properly label these tables. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go to chart layout, going to go to chart title, and we want it to show above the chart. And so this chart is going to be called pre versus post test scores. Alright, and then so we also want to label what this is, because it's not very accurate or scientific to just have these numbers without identifying what they are. And so it's pretty simple enough. So we're just going to go back to the chart layout, and we're just going to do axis titles. This is going to be our vertical component, and we want to have a rotated title. So we're going to change that to score. Alright, and again, we also want to label our bottom, because even though these already have labels, you do need a generalized label for it. So we do need to go back to axis title. We need a horizontal axis below, and that one is going to be questions. Alright, and so here we have it. Here we have our comparisons between test 1 and test 2, or pre-test and post-test, between each questions. And so this could be enough to do it like this, and let's just see what would happen if we put it in our PowerPoint as this, as you compare different scores. And so all it is just copy, paste. And so as you guys have seen, I've already come up with a background that I like for a statistical test. I chose one that's very computer related because, you know, using a computer. But it's not very friendly to look at. It's going to be kind of hard to see if you were to present on this. So there are a couple things that you can do to fix that, unless you want just a boring white background. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to click these lines, and we want to make them a darker color. So we just click right, and we want to format grid lines. And we want the line color to be a solid line, and we want it to be black. So that makes the grid lines a bit easier to see, but it's also still not very good to present on. So what we want to do is we want to also give this grid more of a constant background, as you guys have seen in my other how to make interesting background videos. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to go back to format chart area, and we want it to be filled with a solid color. What that solid color is, it really doesn't matter. Let's just go with a purple. But it's still a little dark and out of nowhere, so we're going to add a little transparency. Let's add 30%, or let's add 40%. You know, feel free to play with it. And we also want to have our border be rounded. Alright, and so we're going to maximize that. Alright. So there you guys can see that's a bit easier to read off of. I mean, your own taste and background could vary from mine, and you could even have little discussions on the side. It just, the way that you put this in your PowerPoint is really up to you. But other than that, the next video that we're going to be doing is more towards our course called Research Methods, where we really compare the percent of significance that these values are different from one another. And if you guys are interested, maybe you could impress Ms. Binton with it. But it's not necessary. Just as a side note, if you guys are interested in having your question scores labeled on each of one of your bars, that is possible. All you need to do is just go to chart layout, and you have two options. You could either do data labels where you have it show, and it'll show the average value for each of these things right above it. You can move them, you can do whatever you want with them. I don't really prefer this way because it seems a little disorganized and whatnot, but something that does look a little bit more professional is if you were to go to data table. You could have data table with legend keys because that has two benefits. It looks more professional as it has your pretest in question 1 for question 2 and question 3 as well as your post-test for each of them. So you can easily see that your pretest has 21, your post-test has 27. That would be a more professional approach, and also the benefit of having this would be that you could get rid of your legend over here, thus, maximizing your chart, which would be ideal. And that's just for side notes if you guys are interested in putting your scores with your bars.